so much for coming. My name is JC Gonzalez. I'm Program and Marketing Manager here at 516 Arts. I'm really excited today to do this event and welcome our wonderful guests, our poets and conservation voters, New Mexico. But before we get started, I wanted to give a land acknowledgement. It was written by a beloved former board member of ours, Roger Frawa of Jemez Pueblo. Albuquerque is currently built on the ancestral homelands of the 19 Puebloan nations that was shared with the Mescalero and Jicarilla Apache nations, the Utes, and later the Diné, their respective ancestors, those living today, and the unborn. This land always has been, is currently, and will always be for the winged, finned, and four-legged. I'd like to acknowledge the sacred living waters and rivers that cross this land. Finally, the sun, the moon, and all the stars and planets that keep our systems in balance. We welcome all. Thank you. So first, we're going to have a poet, Ryan Dennison, join us. Ryan is a Diné transdisciplinary artist and musician from Tehachapi, New Mexico. Dennison's influence in performance art and music composition has been present since 2008. Their work reflects queer brown boy love, dreams, intimacy, and entanglement, while negotiating space in land poems and queer body constellations of intimacy. Please welcome Ryan Dennison.
Ryan Dennison Ninja, on Land of Enchantment, Tanzania Bashchin, Sidna Bitling Atasha Che, Kiani Atashnale. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share some work. Yeah, let's get into it. Let's see. Living in a food desert. Living in a food desert is like scrolling Grindr in a location full of bottoms and no tops. This dry spell makes you think twice about your survival, your needs, your cravings, what you're willing to sacrifice. A land unforgiving, seeing beauty with all the scars. You see men in a different way, accepting their rough edges. Honeysuckle, sweet, prickly pear, cactus juice, thistle weed erected from hardness. A bottom of the food chain really becomes the top. Maybe the only way we can survive is through the new, through the old ways. Sharing lateral violence like flip bucking. This is the only way I see men. He drew the dawn into himself, gifted a smile, fine horse chest. In his stare, a reminder that even though his innocence taken depth by a sleeping giant, he knows this life is beautiful. It's the pain he comes from makes me love him more. He drew the dawn into himself, spreading lungs, length, hummingbird, invoking the dawn from others. I only knew him whirling, daring, cold, stale nights, soaking prayer sticks, interested in the medicine of my laughing song and thighs. He knows the ashes of my tears and builds softly, fire rubbing gently, subtle groans, deep, reaching, pulling, invoking the dawn from me, a patient cured, seen no more by men. Nitzahakes, Nitzahakes. Trying not to let my words run like water, I swallow and exhale clouds of mountain smoke, full of prayers that ascend to the Doan. They answer my prayers by wrapping me in the early dawn of mist. We were never promised tomorrow. A pinch of chaos offered to the east. Coyote the hipster, the trendsetter, black beads for eyes that only see whirling dust, bothering my antheels and towering our houses, ghost beads for teeth speaking a chant of live fast, die young, that YOLO thought. Coyote sings his lullaby while we drink a bottle, praying to it. Please, bottle, take care of me and I'll take care of you. The coyote in me had unraveled my mind and I was left spilling over the horse corral to dry out. The North Mountain had claimed my dreams and I awoke in first world. Eat where we slept and shit in the corner. No sunlight, no wind, and no fire, just voices of men in the dark. The separation of men and women was the time. The scent of male corn washed the floors, the walls, clogging the drains and drowning locusts. Nothing could grow and nothing would change. Recite Coyote's prayer for comfort. I had burned my crops, left my horses and cows to soak in their pool of blood, and in the distance you could still see the smokestacks of sheep carcasses in the arroyos. Sage will not grow here. My hogan is throwing up animal bones and coughing out shards of broken pottery. While the doorway leans to stand strong, the mucus from the fireplace keeps yellow world streaming into glittering world. Out there, not too far, drawn in the sand, keeps the crow's feather dancing in its circle. A pinch of chaos offered to the east. The hum of electricity overhead travels in the air and sings a night chant, calm and steady, calm and steady, calm and steady. Fasten the galaxy and earth together from our hogan smoke. Prayers rise, ready to be returned, ascending pollen mountain. Breathe in the early dawn of mist, and exhale rainbows to our relatives. Sun's feet are the means of travel. By holy means we go about appreciating the cold. Bring Spider-Woman's thread and squash as an offering. Fall is breathing on my turquoise. Lightning stops its evening stretches. Leave the skyscrapers stuffed with brittle locust carcasses and dried corn husks. Run until our lungs are full of memory.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Up next, we have doan, who is a poet, writer, and grief worker rooted in ancestral and earth-based spiritual practice. They write and teach, writing as a creative and contemplative practice to deepen self-connection and affirm our inherent belonging to ourselves, our stories, and the earth. Mai is the author of Water/Tongue, a 2020 Lambda Literary Award finalist.
Hello, thank you for being here. It always just takes a minute when I get in front of people. I'm like, let me ground for a moment. I wanted to start by just offering gratitude to JC for the invitation to be here, to Ryan for such beautiful work. It's such a gift to read with you, and to 516 Arts for having us gather today. Okay. So I'm going to read some poems, some older ones at first, and then I'll read some new work. The first one is called The Beginning of a New Story. Called forth from the dreamers, healers, witches, and women of our bloodline, we are the beginning of a new story. No longer forced to migrate, between truths too small and stories stuck in someone else's stomach. We are not only her body ache or bitter mouth. We are dawn. We are light breaking free. Our dead have always been alive, and when we pray whole heart into the mantle. We become our own prayer. The next poem is called For the Earth Within Us All, or Notes from Being in the Garden. I dug my hands into the earth and touched root. A bird flew overhead and whispered dove. The clouds above went quiet as I moved across the sun. The root was bound to a place I could not see, but it was also in my hand. I think we're all connected like that, deeper and farther in our reach than we could ever even imagine. Imagine yourself as the mountains and the juniper trees and the flowers outside and the ocean tides and the babies just born earthside and the birds and the wind and the seeds in the wind and the cottonwoods rustling their song. I don't know what will happen in the growing absence of water or coral or bees, just that everything is precious and grieving is a practice of love. When I put my hands into the dirt, I feel more love than I can handle. Earth's breathing matter gets stuck under my fingernails, and I remember what it's like to be alive. I remember myself as the mountain and the trees, and the ocean and the seeds. I become the root in my hand, the clouds in the sky, the bird overhead singing dove. This next poem doesn't have a title, but it's for those who dream in the possibilities of after. After the day breaks, after another rise of morning, after the waters swallow the names of all our dead, after the light aches and then bends, after the prayers end, after the full moon and in the stretch of her still glow, after the night goes black, after she leaves in search of her missing stars, after she wanders and after she wakes, after the fires burn out, after the fires burn, after the fires. So the next few poems are new work, and they're all crafted from the same body of writing, with pieces from that writing just smushed together in different ways. So you'll hear like repeated fragments in each poem. Poem number 1. Grief is a boulder my grandmother gave me, the size of a planet, slowly spinning in the nape of my neck. Lately, everything in me pulses in ache. The wind, 1,000 Jupiters, another animal dies out. I think about a future without trees, planetary feeling, oceanic tears, radiates a dull ache, pinches nerves, makes me cry. The solar eclipse made my neck go out. I don't know how else to say that we exist in relation. I breathe because the trees breathe. We're all just rises and falls of the earth. Tell me a better story than a tree growing old in the forest they belong to. Who will we become in the absence of? I am but a small human being engaging with what it means to be alive. My pain body houses living things. The moon in my neck, the wind in my spine. If we are the earth, if we are the ecosystems we're a part of, I don't want to be my car or cellular telephone. I want to be the whales or time inside of a mountain. Another tree falls. Somewhere, my pain body goes off, hurting in the distance. I feel my organic molecules and cellular makeup adapting. My organs change. I fill my pockets with rocks. In space, when stars die out, they leave behind a cosmic phenomenon known as a black hole. Imagine what the earth would be like if every living being were a star. If we are the ecosystems we're a part of, I am learning how to be a planet. The wind in my neck, the moon in my spine. I breathe because the trees breathe. Tell me a better story then. Number 2. I am but a small planet of feeling, holding oceanic, gathering the names of our dead, fill my pockets with rocks. Beyond the blue, a whale is weaving the names of our dead into a poem. The poem, the size of a planet, makes me cry moon. Makes me cry moon. The poem, the size of a planet, our dead into a poem beyond the blue. A whale is weaving the names of our dead, fill my pockets with rocks. Gathering the names of, holding oceanic, I am but a small planet of feeling. And then the last poem. And wonder allows us to feel, being as the stars above, not alone. Who are we beyond the blue, trying to be bigger in the wrong direction, to be softer with, to be right-sized, in its offering changes. Tell me a better story than us, learning how to be a planet, gathering one another along the water like living things to be loved into a new world. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our poets for reading and introducing this event. Now I'd like to hand it over to Conservation Voters New Mexico. They're New Mexico's oldest statewide nonpartisan nonprofit that is committed to connecting the people of New Mexico to their political power to protect our air, land, and water for a healthy land of enchantment. Greg Peters? Start.
Appreciate it, JC. Thank you, everyone. Grateful for the opportunity to come here and speak with you all today, to come together in fellowship, listen to these moving and profound poets we have that have been able to grace us with some really beautiful context setting. Want to start things off first by thanking our poets, thanking 516, JC and Daniel for being able to host us. Thank you all for joining today. And thanking our team. We've got a great crew here together. Yeah, just hoping to be able to keep things casual, speak for a few minutes about our work, both on a high-level landscape view and on a more granular detail about some of the day-to-day policy work that we do to ensure that we have a healthy, just, resilient, sustainable land of enchantment. And then just provide some space, provide an opportunity for you all to be able to ask us some questions, probe a little bit more, learn more about our work. And again, we're always available, accessible. Our contact info, opportunities to engage are available at our table. All you have to do is sign up or scan a QR code, and would love to have you as part of the overall Conservation Voters movement. So, as JC mentioned, we represent Conservation Voters New Mexico, a broad bipartisan organization that works to ensure that we're able to connect with our communities, figure out what our needs are, figure out what is most affecting New Mexicans, and being able to create, from a grassroots level, responsible public policies that advance the protection of our lands, our air, our water, our natural and cultural resources, and our heritage here in the Land of Enchantment. We do this by, again, working on these policies, getting the right people elected, creating an opportunity and pipeline to get progressive candidates into positions where they can speak to the values of New Mexicans, and then getting them into the legislature, getting them to the county commissions, getting them into municipal, state, federal governments, and then holding them accountable, ensuring that they continue to represent the values of conservation voters in Mexico, the values of their districts and their communities. You know, we're one of the most consistent bodies that is present in state policy lawmaking and development for conservation and pro-democracy efforts. We're also one of the more consistent groups that are in the roundhouse, in our capital, during our legislative sessions, ensuring that lawmakers are being held accountable, are working towards our issues, and are speaking towards what affects these communities across the state. So giving a bit of a timeline here, you know, New Mexico legislative sessions generally meet in January through February or March. Every year, we alternate between 30 and 60-day sessions. This past year was a 30-day session, which is 30-day sessions are dedicated towards ensuring that New Mexico has a budget. How do we keep the lights on? How do we provide essential services? How do we get proper resources funded to communities that need them? Alternatively, 60-day sessions are where a lot of the more substantive policy is developed. During this in-between time, which we call the interim period, that's when we're working with groups, communities, stakeholders, allies, and forming opinions, figuring out what matters. How do we move the needle forward? What is most impacting? What are the needs of New Mexicans across the state? And then we work with our legislators. Legislators meet during the interim as well. We provide presentations, we build coalitions, we create consensus. We work, we understand, you know, in terms of passing responsible public policy, what works. It's bringing together broad groups, broad interests, diverse communities, figuring out that siloing political and policy efforts doesn't always work. We need to recognize that, you know, we work within the conservation and environmental sphere. Conservation issues are health issues, they're access issues, they're democracy issues, they're education issues, they're equity issues. This is how we need to create broad consensus and move forward as a holistic community. And that's something that we're glad to be championing, glad to be leading from behind, glad to be finding the right voices that can lead on these issues and provide that necessary push to create the political will of our lawmakers on a local, state, and federal level. So I want to just briefly highlight a couple of flags, a couple of our updates from the past legislative session. As I mentioned, this was a budget session, so we were trying to get our lawmakers, specifically our appropriators, the necessary information, education, and political will in order to move forward on a lot of our big budget priorities to protect our lands, air, water, wildlife, culture, and economy. We had a couple of big wins. We were able to permanently fund something called the Land of Enchantment Conservation Fund that funded 11 different programs across 7 different state agencies for successful but chronically underfunded needs to get resources deployed on the ground in communities that need them. That's creating ballparks, road and wildlife crossing infrastructure, helping with community ditch cleanups and acequia support, funding our watersheds, funding our landscapes, providing resilience against some of the catastrophic issues that we've been facing with climate change, and funding rural economic programs and cultural preservation programs. And this is set up now in perpetuity. It's ready to go. It's going to start distributing money to communities across the state in July. And we're looking forward to continuing to communicate about that and sharing a lot of success stories that are going to touch every county, every community in the state. We were also able to pass a critical but seemingly uninteresting bill called the New Mexico Match Fund. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but recently the Biden administration passed the landmark generational investment, the Infrastructure Reduction Act, that's going to provide federal matching funds to all 50 states in order to provide states the ability to be able to move forward on infrastructure projects, climate resiliency projects, you name it. And now we were able to get that fund seeded with $75 million this past session that we're going to be able to completely match through these federal investment dollars to deploy money, support, and resources and projects across the state, including our rural and urban communities. We are also faced with a difficult decision on the federal level. The U.S. Supreme Court had a landmark ruling, Sackett versus EPA, that significantly diminishes New Mexico's ability to address surface waters. So we recognize that now more than ever, New Mexico has to be able to control how we manage our water and how we protect our water. And we were able to get $7 million appropriated to the Environment Department to ensure that New Mexico could be able to manage our surface waters effectively and most responsibly, given that we're going to lack that federal support moving forward. I'm going to let my colleague here speak about some of the other successes, but you know, I kind of got away from myself and forgot to introduce myself. So before I hand it off to my colleague here, I just want to provide an opportunity. My name is Greg Peters. You pull the string on my back, and I like to talk policy, so that's why I often get ahead of myself oftentimes. But I'm the Vice President of Programs here at Conservation Voters New Mexico. I'm lucky enough to be able to work with and oversee our incredible policy team. That includes my colleague here, Sammy Cow, also John Martinez, our Campaigns and Civic Engagement Director, Hayden Cuffman, our Program Associate, and Chloe Dixon, our Communications Manager. Really just a phenomenal team of staunch and committed advocates working on just resilient communities here in New Mexico. So I'm going to hand it off to Sammy here to introduce herself and talk a little about what she was working on during this past legislative session, and then we'll move ahead towards the future and talk about what we're working on and what we're excited to engage with the community about.
That's Greg just riffing, so I have to actually have notes. But my name is Sammy Cow. I am the Climate and Energy Director at Conservation Voters New Mexico. This is my 4th year. Prior to, I graduated with my law degree at UNM, and I specialized in natural resources and environmental law. Never wanted to practice law, so I kind of found myself in a dream job with CVNM doing policy and advocacy work. So we also have some openings coming up. So if you want to do this kind of work too, we are welcome. We definitely want to have you. So my role at CVNM is to lobby, develop, and implement policies around climate mitigation or climate change mitigation, renewable energy deployment, and regulating our oil and gas industry. At CVNM, our prime focus and our priority when we push these priorities and push these policies is to ensure that equity is woven in, if not prioritized, when we are crafting these laws. Giving a little bit of historical context, I'm sure many of you know that like the environmental conservationist movement started back in the 50s, and it was a movement led for and by wealthy, generally white communities. And it started with this not in my backyard kind of movement where they didn't want industry developing anywhere where they were living. But the really terrible consequence of that is these developments ended up being in low-income, underserved communities, generally of color. So we are trying to acknowledge that in our work, and I'm not sure if it's ever going to be able to be fully reversed, but making sure that that kind of mistake doesn't happen moving forward. So we want to achieve what is called a just transition, meaning that moving forward when we push climate policy, the communities, the frontline communities who have historically been reliant on extractive industries are not left behind, that we make sure that their needs are met, and that we can provide a sustainable economy and a workforce that they can really thrive in. Sorry, I'm trying to look after my notes here. So I just want to talk about like what that really looks like here in New Mexico, because we are a very unique state. We are a majority minority state, meaning most of us are not white, and we also have much higher levels of poverty than other states have to deal with. But we are also the 2nd highest producer of oil and gas, second only to Texas. So that really makes things a little bit more challenging than maybe other states on the West Coast when it comes to pushing good climate policy. Like we have entire communities in the San Juan Basin up north and the Permian Basin down south. A lot of indigenous tribal communities and communities of color, migrant communities who work for the oil and gas industry. So we go down there and say, this industry is bad for our environment, it's bad for our climate. it's also bad for you, so we're going to take this all away in the next 50 years. It's not something that generally lands well, but polling and conversation and education has showed us that these people have been given these jobs, not necessarily because it was like their dream careers, but it provided for their families. So what we want to do is be able to provide an avenue for them to do similar work, but in a more sustainable format, if that makes sense. So another thing with New Mexico having the second highest oil producing numbers is that our state budget, like Greg was talking about, is overwhelmingly majority coming from oil and gas money. So like he was saying, how the budget, when we are working on it in the legislative session, it's keeping all the lights on, making sure that all our state employees have their salaries, our schools are funded. All of that is hugely funded by the oil and gas industry. So when we're talking about ramping down this industry so that we can effectively address the climate crisis, it puts us in between a rock and a hard place, because we need to make sure that we find alternative funding resources to replace that money. Another massive obstacle is that, because they make so much money, and because we produce so much oil and gas, the oil and gas lobby is the most powerful in the entire state. There's no world where even very influential organizations like ours, combined with our allies in the climate space, will ever be able to outspend or outlobby our opponents on the other side of the aisle when it comes to this kind of work. So another thing that we have to really be mindful of when we're pushing these policies. Another thing that might not be quite as obvious is renewable energy resources. I think we all talk about how New Mexico is sunny like 360 days out of the year. We should have all the solar power in the world. We have tons of wind power potential, but as of right now, very hopeful for the next 50-ish years, but as of right now, there's no renewable energy resource, even all of them combined, that can really replace the oil and gas industry. And that's really difficult because the technology is actually so much better, which creates another problem. The oil and gas industry provides so many jobs for people across our state, and because the technology around solar and wind is so much better, we just don't need as much people power to be working in the field. So there's really not like a one-to-one replacement ratio when it comes to the jobs that these two industries provide. So another thing that we have to be very creative and mindful about when we move forward. So how do we address these obstacles? Like my colleague Greg was saying, building consensus is probably the most important thing that we have to do. Learning how to negotiate in good faith, and learning when and how to compromise when it comes to bills when we're in the legislative session, when the rubber hits the ground. Knowing like what we need and what we can live without, but what we can absolutely not live without, and how we can get a bill passed. Something that a lot of people are mentioning a lot now, like this this saying is not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good when it comes to good climate policy. I think is something that in the moment is really hard to kind of keep in mind and have sight of, but that generally I think is the end goal and really the best way to have the most effective outcome. And also recognizing that our political system is massively flawed, but it's the one that we have, and if we want to push the needle forward, we have to work in ways that cooperate with the system, but also push the needle incrementally so that our political system isn't so the way it is. And through these values, I guess, we have been able to be very, very successful with some good climate policy in the last handful of years. In 2019, we passed the Energy Transition Act, which committed New Mexico to being 100% renewable energy for our electricity by the year 2045. That resulted in the closure of a coal power plant up in the Four Corners area. But again, like what I was saying, when that coal plant closed, a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of those people were indigenous communities. So part of that bill had to really weave in how we can provide health insurance, like guaranteed basic income for these people who lost their jobs, especially those who have been working in the industry for years and years and really should have had an income, or like, you know, a pension type of income. So that was written into that legislation. In 2021, we passed community solar, which is huge. We are in the processes of like getting that program up and off the ground. But basically, if you think of these big solar panel farms, instead of paying PNM every month for your monthly bill that is measured by the meter, you can like subscribe like the way we subscribe to like Netflix and say, my family, my household will generally use X amount of electricity per month. So you pay that amount, and the payments can be as low as $7 a month, and 30% of the energy generated in these solar farms were going to be reserved for the use of low-income underserved communities. So that's kind of what we mean by like, we have these climate bills that are, you know, the main purpose is to ramp down greenhouse gas emissions, move towards renewable energy, but there's things in there that are really prioritized and pushed as, you know, the most important piece of the legislation to ensure that, you know, our most vulnerable communities are very much looked after. This past session, we passed the Clean Fuels Act, and it was a highly controversial bill, and I will never say that it was an end-all be-all for good climate policy, but as we all know, cars are a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So, you know, we have EVs, but in the transition period from where we're at now to being fully electric cars, we need to find fuels that are less polluting, and this is what this bill creates a market and incentivizes companies to create these cleaner fuels so that we can use them, especially because, you know, generally I think right now electric vehicles are used by people that have a higher income. So it's not reasonable to expect that people in more rural areas are going to be jumping to this kind of technology right away. So there has to be a way for them to commute to and from their jobs in a way that is less polluting and better for our state in general. So looking to 2025, we really want to push our governor to prioritize climate in the biggest way by passing comprehensive climate legislation. By comprehensive, we mean like it's not just an environmental bill, it is a healthcare bill, it's an education bill, it is an access bill, it's a democracy bill. Because if you really think about it, climate change will touch everyone at some point, someday. So it's an issue area that really touches on a lot of different social justice reform areas as well. So that is what we're looking for. We are looking for partners in every kind of sphere, including art. So if you ever have had clever ideas, which from one of the poems that you read, I agree that you might just, you know, think about this from time to time. We are open to those ideas. But yeah, that is what I had prepared today, and I'll give it back to Greg.
Thanks, Sammy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your insight and your continued leadership on these issues. Sammy really has been at the forefront of a lot of our climate and energy policy here at the state level. We have greatly appreciative of the work that she's done. But you know, as she mentioned, we're already looking ahead to 2025. Not just 2025. As I mentioned, we alternate between 30 and 60-day sessions. So 2025 is going to be the last 60-day of the current governor's administration. And I think we all recognize that this is going to be a very important time to develop careful, authentic, intentional policies that benefit the greatest amount of New Mexicans going into this next 60-day. We're present in a number of different coalition spaces, working with stakeholders across the state. But we also recognize we have blind spots. You know, we know enough to know that there's plenty that we don't know. And we are constantly working with outreach and education with our elected officials, working with stakeholder groups directly impacted by this. As Sammy mentioned, climate change is coming. It's going to affect all of us. But it's going to disproportionately impact rural communities, communities of color, impoverished communities. And we have to recognize that, and we have to move forward with a just, equitable approach to being able to stem a lot of these coming issues. So I encourage folks, reach out to us. We love to talk. We love to listen more than anything else. As I mentioned, there's a lot that we don't know, and we're constantly trying to get better. We know that we need to do better. We must do better. We will do better. But a lot of that is going to be informed by that outreach and education, learning more about what's affecting communities across the state, working with our elected officials to ensure that the needs of their districts and their constituents in those communities are being properly reflected in the policies that we're working forward to. But get engaged. Learn more about what we do. Learn more about your legislators. Who's representing your district? Who's speaking to your issues and your values? We've spoken a lot about the legislative session over the past half hour, but the political process is never ending. We're looking forward to a robust and vibrant ongoing discussion about our issues during the interim session. Our legislators have interim committees. They meet in communities across the state. We track this. You can go to nmlegis.gov and learn more about where your legislators are going to be and how you can best engage and work with them. And we're constantly reaching out. We've got our coalitions of committed advocates, but we want to hear from people on the ground. We want to learn more from people on the ground. So we'll be engaging in events across the state. We're going to try to be in communities. We're going to do town halls. We're going to speak with our legislators and allow them to directly engage with their constituents and hear more about what's affecting them. But we're also thinking on a couple of different timeframes as well. Obviously, we've got a number of priorities that we're looking forward to advancing and learning more and developing priorities, future priorities, over the next couple of months. But we're also trying to think to the next session. We don't want to be reactive. We don't want to think about just what's the direct thing in front of us that we have to address. Change comes incrementally, as Sandy said. So as a result, it's really incumbent upon us to think in the long term. So we're looking to 2026. We're looking to 2027. We're looking to the next governor administration. This is going to be a big year electorally as well. We encourage folks to learn about candidates, learn about races, get engaged, ask questions, show up to events, help inform the democratic process so that we can get the right people into the building to represent our values and also think about who are going to be the next stewards representing us, the next elected officials, our next leaders, and how can we work with them, engage with them, work on policy development with them, and ultimately hold them accountable over the next few years. We want to talk about issues that we can get done now. We also want to talk about issues that we want to get done in the next 3 to 5 years, 10 years, generationally. How can we make these investments? How can we have a lasting impact? So with that, we're excited about the future. We're optimistic about New Mexico and what we can do and how we can create these just, resilient communities, engage with people, rural and urban, alike, across the spectrum. We've got a beautiful, complex tapestry of groups and communities here in New Mexico, and we want to move forward together in the most just possible way. So we've been talking a lot, but I think we're going to use this opportunity to kind of hold some space and see if folks have any questions. Don't want to put anybody on the spot, but we'd love to talk. And also, you're free. If you're anything like me, you'll have a couple of questions immediately after this event. So please feel free to engage with us at our table afterwards. John, over to you.
If people are wondering which candidates to support in the upcoming elections, which candidates are going to be the climate champion candidates, how can they find out who those candidates are?
That's a great question. So one thing that we didn't touch on today is one of the hallmarks of our policy development and accountability here at CVNM. It's our scorecard. As part of the conservation movement effort, one of the primary tools that we use to hold our elected officials accountable is our scorecard. We have, as we mentioned, we're in the building every day. We're active in developing policy from the very beginning, constant cycle. We see the policies that are going to be resonating with us, with our membership, and we're prioritizing advancing responsible conservation public policy. So there are a number of votes. Every session has hundreds of different bills that are introduced and vetted through the process of committees and floor votes. But we have a number of bills that we that we run every year that we carefully consider, analyze, and make recommendations for that we score. So legislators that support these votes their score goes up. If you do not support these votes, score goes down. So that's how we define what our conservation champions look like, how we define the complex targets and educators that we need to work on outreach for. So we encourage folks to visit our website, cvnm.org, and visit our scorecard page to learn more about your legislators, what their lifetime scores are, what their most recent scores are, and breaking it down by our legislative priorities. We've got them at the table up front, as Senator Pope, who's one of our highest scoring legislators, is currently holding. So just encourage folks to stop by the table on the way out and grab a copy of our scorecard. As I mentioned, it's also available online. And you can read it, break down by House and Senate districts, and learn some about the key votes that we have there. I will also say that CVNM is going to be releasing our endorsements for the upcoming primary and general elections for this year. We have a number of active races going on right now. This past session saw a number of legislators step down, a number of districts in play. We've got some great conservation champions, some people who have supported our issues for years, including here in Bernalillo County. And we've got a number of folks, in active races. So we'll be making that announcement next week, I believe on Thursday. So encourage folks to visit our website, check us out on social media, and we'll be distributing that far and wide about our primary announcements. And then we're going to be moving full steam ahead this summer into the general election to ensure that people who properly represent conservation and pro-democracy values are elected here across the state. So thanks for the question, John.
I had a random question, and I'm not sure how pertinent it may be, but I was reading about how there's a kind of ongoing, at this point like decades long, back and forth over the Rio Grande between New Mexico and Texas, and kind of percentage of, I believe, water runoff. And then there was like yet another kind of recent development in the Supreme Court about the kind of distribution of that. Is the Rio Grande and that kind of ongoing thing part of something that your organization tracks, or is there an insight?
Yes. So let me give you the.
Yes.
Sammy's laughing because I can give you a short answer or I can give you a 2-hour answer. The answer is yes. We are active in water policy. In addition to our team here, we have 2 full-time advocates working on water issues, including water quality and water quantity. Quantity, I think, speaks to some of the issues that we've been having with the Rio Grande in terms of drought desertification and issues over compact compliance between us and the state of Texas. Yes, you're correct, there has been an ongoing lawsuit. And there are a lot of people, including some folks in this room, who can probably speak more authoritatively and eloquently about the complexities and dynamics of that. I wish I could give you an easy layman's answer, but frankly, there's not enough water, there are too many people trying to get access to it, and there's not enough falling out of the sky. We have been active in a number of different policy spaces, trying to think through, on a short and long-term level, how do we address New Mexico water quantity, and how do we protect it? This is one of the references I made earlier with surface water permitting. How do we protect the water that we currently have and ensure that we have enough of it to go around? It's one of the questions of our times. We're active in it, we're working on it. There are a lot of water policy wonks, people who understand policy, people who understand the engineering side, the nuts and bolts of things, but really what we're trying to do is ensure that we've got a group of people together, a coalition together, working on ensuring that we've got water for all. And that's going to include the people who are most impacted by this. Certainly something that we're always open to hearing more perspectives on. We need to get as many people involved in the process as possible, but we also need to move forward on it decisively. The governor's issued her long-term state water plan. We're active with working with the Office of State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission, other states around us on Rio Grande and Colorado River and a lot of the other tributaries. But yes, it's something that we recognize that is paramount to the protection of resources and culture and community and just communities across the state. We're active on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, again, just want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Appreciate your time, appreciating you listening to us, appreciating engaging in a thoughtful conversation here. Just want to, again, at the risk of sounding like a broken drum, just encourage you to stop by our table on the way out the door, pick up a scorecard, pick up one of our newsletters, scan the QR code or give us your name, just so you can learn more. We try to keep the volume of emails and communications at a reasonable tempo, so we're not going to inundate you. Just want to make sure that folks are informed and know what we're working on. And you know, our newsletter includes contact information for all the staff here today. So don't hesitate to reach out to us, ask questions, want to learn more, and looking forward to folks participating in the public process over the next year. Thank you. I'll hand it off to JC.
All right. Again, I'd like to thank Conservation Voters New Mexico. Thank you so much for presenting today. Please do take a look at the materials they brought. And thank you again to the poets who read. Please feel free to take a look around at the exhibition if you haven't had a chance to do so. And thank you all very much for coming.